I'm Theron Williams. I'm the president of the Bible is Black History Institute, and I am the pastor of the Mount Carmel Church of Indianapolis, Indiana. And I just want to talk to us today about the Bible being the history of a black people whom the Bible identifies as Hebrews, Israelites, or Jews. And I know that there are those of you who might think that this is nothing but pseudo-scholarship, and no serious thinker has ever looked into this. But that could not be further from the truth. Serious scholars have studied this whole phenomenon, and they've been studying it for many, many decades. Most notably, the late Dr. Cain Hope Felder, who is a Columbian scholar. He's from Columbia University, PhD, Ivy League University. And he also taught at another Ivy League university, Princeton, and he also was a professor at Howard University. He has the credentials. And he committed most of his academic life studying this phenomenon that people call pseudo-scholarship. Dr. Cain Hope Felder wrote that classic book, Troubling Biblical Waters. And in that book, he argues that the people of the Bible were not white, but the people of the Bible were black people and people of mixed ancestry. He says that the people of the Bible were black, Nubian black, some of them, while others were of mixed ancestry that made up the congregation of Israel. But later on in his career, he published the African Heritage Bible. And he seemed to have backed off on the idea that the people of the Bible were of mixed ancestry based upon the depictions that he has in the African Heritage Bible that represented the people of the Bible. They were all black people, all of them, every one of them. There was none that he depicted in his Bible, and he got pictures in it, depictions. There were none that were of mixed ancestry. They were all Nubian black. Here are some images that came from that Bible. We see Moses. Look at how he depicted Moses. We see Noah. This one reflects Noah. Look at Abraham, Nubian black. Look at Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This is Dr. Cain Hope Felder. Nobody can say he's a pseudo-scholar. This is a scholar of the nth degree, Cain Hope Felder. Look at the depiction of David and Goliath. Look at the rendition of Jesus and the disciples. Look at his display of Jesus on the cross. And look at how he depicted the Apostle Paul. This is Dr. Cain Hope Felder, who had given most of his academic life pursuing this matter. And I know that there are those who argue that the Bible is a mythological history of a people called Israel, and that many of the Bible stories were heavily embellished to make a point, and it's not reliable history as we rely on history the way we do history today. And if that's what you think, that's fine. You can think that. But while thinking that, it is still rooted in a reality. This is not just a story that's made up, that has no roots in historical reality. That is, there was a people called Israel during biblical times. Now, was their story embellished by the later writers and the later priests? Perhaps. Nevertheless, there was still a people called Israel back in the Bible days. And what I'm doing today is not so much theology, but it is more so history. Because most Bible believers are literalists. They believe the Bible literally. They literally believe everything in the Bible, and they see it as actual history. And so that's how I'm approaching this study as a literalist. You know, we can get into the mythological piece at another time. We can deal with all of that because I understand it all. Understand all of that, that is. But we're looking at those who understand the Bible as literalists. And most people who read the Bible, most people who embrace the Bible are biblical literalists. But before we get into the study, I want to continue to press the case that the people of the Bible were actually black people, and I want to do it from a historical perspective. That is the location of Israel. Israel is actually located in Northeast Africa. Look at this map. I brought a map for you to look at. Northeast Africa. We see Egypt, and then we see this space here, this green space here. That would be considered the Sinai Peninsula. And on the other side of the Sinai Peninsula, we have Israel. So Israel is physically connected to Egypt, and Egypt is physically connected to Africa, which would make Israel a part of Africa. And there's no getting around that. I don't care what you do or what you say. Israel is a physical part of Africa. That is up until 1859 with the creation of the Suez Canal, when that land mass was removed to create a passageway for ships to get in to the Red Sea region. Ships would come into this region, and they would come from the Mediterranean Sea, and they needed to have access into this Red Sea area. And so the Suez Canal was cut into that, which actually separated Israel from Egypt, the Suez Canal. But during biblical antiquity, there was no Suez Canal, and Israel was physically connected to Egypt. That is, the definition of a continent is one of the 7 large contiguous land masses that comprise planet Earth. And Africa is one of those land masses that's surrounded by 2 or more major water expanses. In every continent, you can get to every part of it without having to cross a major water expanse. For example, I can go to Africa and go to South Africa and start walking north, and I don't have to cross a water expanse until I can reach Libya or Tunisia or Algeria or Egypt or Israel without having to cross a major water expanse. That's the definition of a continent. I can start walking in Nigeria, West Africa, and start walking east and not have to cross a major water expanse until I get to Egypt or Israel. That's a continent. And Israel is on the continent of Africa, and Africans are black people. And one of the issues that's so mind-boggling to me, and it speaks to the whole question of racism against black people in particular, is that when we start talking about the history of ancient peoples of the world, when we start talking about ancient Europeans, we assume that they're white. We don't argue that. We don't question that. We assume that they're white. When we start talking about ancient Chinese, we don't question what color they were or their indigenous physical characteristics. We assume that they have a yellow tint to their skin. When we start talking about ancient Indians of India, we assume that they bear the indigenous physical traits, that they have a reddish tint to their skin tones. But when we start talking about ancient Africans, especially Northern Africans, now we want to argue, what color were they actually? We don't do that with Egyptians. We don't do that with Europeans. We don't do that with Chinese, with Japanese, with Indians. We don't do that with anybody except Africans, in particular Northern Africans. What color were they? Well, if they're from the continent of Africa, they're black people. Just like you assume if they're from the continent of Europe, they're white people. And it's interesting because Socrates was from Europe. And in Socrates' last interview with one of his disciples, Aristobulus, he described himself as having a broad nose and thick lips. That's African. This came out of Socrates' mouth as recorded by one of his disciples. He described himself with African features. Nevertheless, he was from Europe. But when we see depictions of Socrates, he always bears European characteristics. Despite the fact the man said, my nose is broad and my lips are thick. But because of his European ancestry, we assume that he's white. Because Northern Africans have contributed so much to the development of world civilization that because of our bias against black folk, we don't think that they had anything to contribute. So they could not have been black people. So we have to make them another color to fit the narrative that nothing good can come from black people. So we have to go to Africa and paint black people white to justify the contributions that they made to civilization. It's really sad. Which is a segue into what we need to be talking about. That the Bible is the history of a black people. And I just want to do one thing. And this is a long, drawn-out series. I'm just going to give you a little piece of it. Let's go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 10, where it gives us a description of the land of Eden. It says, a river watering the garden flowed from Eden. From there it was separated into 4 headwaters. The name of the first is the Pishon. It winds through the entire land of Havilah, where there is gold. The gold of that land is good. Aramaic resin and onyx are also there. The name of the second river is the Gihon. It winds through the entire land of Cush. The name of the third river is the Tigris. It runs along the east side of Asher. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. Genesis 2, verses 10 through 14. The focus of this text is on the rivers, the 4 headwaters that waters the land of Eden. But in that description, we see 3 land masses. The first land mass we see is Havilah. Havilah. And where is Havilah? Where is Havilah? Well, we know Havilah, other than it's mentioned here in Genesis 2, he is also mentioned in Genesis chapter 10, verse 7, and he's mentioned again in 1 Chronicles chapter 1, verse 9. And when he's mentioned in Genesis 10 and 1 Chronicles 1, it is in a genealogy, and he is always identified as the grandson of Cush. And we know Cush is Ethiopia. So wherever else Havilah is, it has to be in close proximity to Cush. And we know Cush is Ethiopia. A virulent racist, Augustus Henry King, though he was a racist, he was brilliant. He's an ethnologist, a 19th century Irish ethnologist. He suggested that Havilah is South Africa. And he does it on the basis of the description of the land of Havilah in Genesis chapter 2. He said, the Genesis narrative says that there is gold there, aromatic resin, and onyx. And he said that those commodities were plenteous in South Africa. Not only that, he said because Havilah is always identified as a grandson of Cush, he had to have been in close proximity to Cush. And so he identifies Havilah as South Africa. The other landmass is Cush. And we all know that Cush is Ethiopia, and that is in East Africa. The last landmass is Asher, and that is up near Asia. And the landmass of Asher had several names throughout biblical history. At one point it was named Assyria, at one point it was named Syria, at another point it was Babylon, at another point it was Ur, it was Chaldea. It carried several names. But in Genesis 2, it is ascribed Asher, up near Asia. So we see the land masses. Two of the land masses are in Africa. The third land mass is up near Asia. Now let's look at the rivers that watered the land of Egypt. The first waterway is the Pishon. And according to the Genesis narrative, the Pishon River, it winds through Havilah. We identified Havilah as South Africa. I brought a map with me to show you that this river, this is the Orange River that we know of today. Back in the Genesis narrative, it was called the Pishon, and we see it as the Genesis narrative describes it. We see South Africa, and we see this river winding through Havilah. So that's the first river. The second river is the Gihon River. And we see the Gihon River as it is described in the book of Genesis, as it winds through the land of Cush. We see this blue on the map is coming down and it winds through, that's Ethiopia at the bottom right hand. It's winding through Ethiopia. And then we see the last two rivers that are up near Asia. We see Syria here, and then we see the Euphrates River, and we see the Tigris River. And so we see the outline, the boundaries of the land of Eden. Now, I didn't say the Garden of Eden, and neither did the Bible. The Bible said the land of Eden. The land of Eden is a major expanse, as we have just seen, as the Bible describes it. But there was a place within that boundary of Egypt, of Eden, called the Garden of Eden, where God placed the man and the woman, where God began humanity. There was a specific place in the land of Eden called, that was a garden in Eden. Where is that garden? We'll never know. And especially those who say this is a mythological history, they don't even look for it. But for those of you who are literalists, there are those who might be trying to find the Garden of Eden, where it was. It was somewhere on earth. Where was it? And here's where it gets exciting for me. When the Bible begins to intersect with science, we can get a hint of where the Garden of Eden may have been. What hints do you have? In 1987, Dr. Rebecca Cann led a group of scientists who was looking for the mother of modern humans. She traced the mitochondrial DNA. Now, mitochondrial DNA, we all carry that in our bodies. We carry mitochondrial DNA. But only women can pass mitochondrial DNA to the next generation. So it makes sense that if Rebecca Cann is trying to find the mother of modern humans, she would trace the mitochondrial DNA, which she did. She went around the world and she collected samples of mitochondria from people all over the world. And she traced it back with her brilliant scientific mind, traced it back to East Africa. And she concluded that the mother of modern humans is a black woman from East Africa, and here's where it gets great. It is within the boundaries of the biblical description of the land of Eden in East Africa. She concluded that it was a black woman. They unearthed physical remains of people, and they did the carbon dating, and the carbon dating was consistent with Dr. Rebecca Cann's research about how old the mitochondria went back and how old the mother of modern humans must have been. And when they unearthed skull fragments, she got her team together and forensic scientists, and they put a bust together of what they believe the mother of modern humans looked like. And here it is. Mitochondrial Eve is what the scientific community calls it. Mitochondrial Eve. There it is. There she is. And this was found within the boundaries of the land of Eden, as Genesis describes it. There she is. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever seen this image when you're studying Adam and Eve in Sunday school? How many of you seen this image? How many of you seen this image when you're studying the story of Adam and Eve in Vacation Bible School? How many of you have ever seen this image when you're watching TV and they're doing a story on Adam and Eve? You've never seen Eve look like this. She's always white with blonde hair and blue eyes. Biblical literalists, listen up. This is science. And I know that there are a whole lot of science deniers right now, but this is science, beloved. We saw the land of Eden, the boundaries of the land of Eden, and then we saw Dr. Rebecca Cann's work as she traced the mitochondria back to East Africa, dug up skull fragments, created a bust that would depict the mother of modern humans, mitochondrial Eve. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to her. But the men were not going to be outdone, because Dr. Spencer Wells in 2005 completed the Geographic project. Because National Geographic and IBM came together to fund Dr. Spencer Wells' project, and he called it the Geographic Project. And what Dr. Spencer Wells was looking for, he was looking for the father of modern humans. And we all know that women have two X chromosomes and men have an X and a Y chromosome. So Dr. Spencer Wells said, if I'm going to trace the DNA of men to try to find out where the father of modern humans came from, I got to trace the Y chromosome. So he traced the Y chromosome, and it took him all the way back, guess where, beloved? East Africa. Not far from mitochondrial Eve. Spencer Wells concluded that the father of modern humans is a black man from East Africa, and they call him they called him scientific Adam. They call the woman mitochondrial Eve. So according to science, you got Adam and Eve. They're both black people from Africa. And the way, and just like they did Eve, when they, dug up remains and that type of thing and found busts, they created a bust of what they believe the father of modern humans looked like. There he is. There's Adam. Biblical literalists, science trace the origin of humans back to East Africa within the perimeters as described at the land of Eden according to the Bible. You want to know what Adam and Eve look like? There they are. Adam and Eve. The Bible is the history of a black people. This is the Bible is black history. And when you read the genealogy that we find in the Gospel according to St. Luke, go read that genealogy. The genealogy stretches back to Adam and Eve because they're doing the genealogy of Jesus. And it stretches back to these two people, Adam and Eve. There's a whole lot more that we can talk about. And I do want to talk more with you about this. There are several other things that we can explore, that we can look at, and I want to carry it further with you, but we're going to stop right here.